Among his many publications, he is the author of Shifting the Color Line, Race and the American Welfare State, and also Shaping Race Policy, the United States in Comparative Perspective, which is particularly relevant to today's discussion as it is a comparative study between France, US, and England on the policy of the integration of minorities. So please welcome Professor Lieberman.
Thanks very much. We have the unenviable task of keeping you awake until dinner time. But I feel confident that we're up to the task. We have 4 papers that we're going to hear. And I'm going to briefly introduce all 4 of the panelists before we start, and then we'll go in order, and we'll ask each panelist to speak for about 20 minutes. And then we'll have some time left over for questions. So our first paper is by Hisham Ivy, who's a lecturer here at SIPA and one of our truly great citizens of the school. So I'm glad to be on the panel with him. Hisham's paper is called Patrimoine du Ghetto: Does France have an American-style race problem? Second, to my immediate right, we have Louise Kenker, who's in the sociology department at Marquette University. Her paper is called Racializing Muslims in the United States. Third, we have Mohamed Timera from Paris. His paper is called Generations of Africans in France Between Ethnicity, Skin Color, and Religion. And finally, to my far right, Valérie Amiro from the University of Montreal. Her paper is called The Racialization of Muslims in France, Historical Perspectives and Sociological Inputs. So I think we're in for a real treat to hear all these 4 papers, and I will turn it over to Hisham, and I'll let you decide whether you want to sit or stand.
Very comfortable with English, so I'm going to read my communication. My paper deals with Soninke migration and their Islam in French and other countries. Soninke come from Senegal, Mali, Mauritania. They are the first migrant in France, and today yet an important part of them. It's another phase of Islam in France, less documented. In this discussion of Soninke migration and its diaspora, the historian François Manchoual characterized it as an old migration. Through that expression, he understands that contemporary migration are kept the characteristic of pre-modern migration. That is so to say that they have the strength of continually reinvented tradition and that they maintain the Soninke distinction. The Soninke distinction expresses itself, in my opinion, through 2 intertwined social aspects: the Soninke language and Islam. The space of this historical Soninke collectivity depends on a particular geography, the center that corresponds to the original village, called by the Soninke Kara, and immigration or diaspora that represent the space of dispersion, called by Soninke Gourne, literally the bush. In the greeting exchange on the day of Eid, the sacrifice of Abraham, which is for the Soninke the end of the year, a recurring prayer and greeting is to be Karanko, that is to die on the home soil, Kara, and not far away. From the very beginning of my work on Soninke migration, I have focused on the construction of identity and the role of religion, and paid particularly attention to the singularity of Muslim Africans in an intellectual and institutional space where they had limited visibility as such. I have living in a workers' residence, noted through my daily observation a fact that appeared to be memorable. When Soninke workers identified themselves negatively, they tended to emphasize ethnicity, the Soninkahu, which could be translated through Soninkiti, the Soninki identity, or black color, Fakambina, black skin. And when they defined themselves positively, they valorized themselves by putting forth their being Muslim. This two-face was thus consecrated, one as the positive pole and the other of the negative pole. On migration, Soninke communities preserve the label and the status position: political aristocracy, religious aristocracy, artisanal caste, descendant of slaves, as well as the elder youth hierarchy, and follow them. Their negative definition of themselves is thus precisely dependent on the persistence in their midst of social status and that towards source of conflict, authoritarianism, and inequality. However, the rejection of this practice are exercised by invoking the principle of equality of believer before God in Islam, and secondly, through democratic value and republican equality. This type of dissidence displaces the center of gravity of the group towards that which build the consensus the most, Islam. The silent identity reflects fairly netly into the vernacular construction of their distinction from French society. In fact, Soninke migrants are not always inscribed in the African versus French split, or in the white versus black split. Their distinction has more to do with the opposition of An-Nasara, which means Nazareans, and Muslimu, who means Muslim. They oppose the recomposition to French majority society, which is reduced to Christian or miscreant, kafir. Thus, for them, the attributed negritude and African origin, as is sometimes the case of their ethno-linguistic group, ethnicity, are reconstituted in and by Islam. Ethnic honors, like Max Weber said, identity, or at least its internal side, is less anchored in the color black as in Islam, or as much in color as in Islam. And when they identify by ethnicity, they charge it, filling it with Islam. That which singularly identifies Soninke Islam is its fragmentary nature. It is an Islam that I have defined as segmented Islam, as opposed to fraternal Islam, like brotherhood, as is Muridism. This segmented Islam is esclipus or little visible in the beginning of Soninke worker migration in the 50-60, but later appeared implanted into the community of workers, and starting in the mid-70s has progressively affirmed itself in the city and the culture to which African family moved. Religious education takes a particular dimension in the French context of the characterization of society as non-Muslim, as a religious minority and also an ethnic minority, minority because race, minority because origin, attempts to reimagine their identity in the French context. They foreground the religious over the ethnic. Working with the association movement and the activist movement for the promotion of Soninke culture and language, I have been in touch directly with the strategy of immigrants, parents, of youths born of immigration, and of institutions, school, social work, health authority, etc. My perception is that in all their identity construction, Islam takes a central place. The militant most engaged in the promotion of Soninke culture give great importance to Islam. All the associations for the promotion of Soninke language in the country of origin or in other countries of migration like Egypt are also strongly mobilized for the translating into Soninke sacred texts of Islam. For them, these texts are considered as an aspect of their culture, cultural and linguistic heritage, with the passage to a writer culture must integrate as much as its focus on stories and legends, oral history, epics, maxims, and proverbs. In this spirit, the Association of Soninke Students in Cairo, Egypt, has taken significant steps in translating texts of the Quran and published a bilingual Soninke Arabic journal called Sobe. In French, when the Association for the Promotion of the Soninke language proposed to parents to teach the Soninke language and to study the history of their culture, parents responded as follows: "What you say is very good. If the children could know their maternal language, it would be a very good thing. However, for us, the most important matter, which is also problematic, is how to make it so that these children know the verses of the Quran, can read Arabic, and practice their religion." In their definition of their situation, immigrants have experienced a recomposition that made it so that certain form of belonging, which used to be based on local ethnicity, have been relegated to the background in order to emphasize and draw Islam back to the center, as it is the real source of the split between us and them. In different Soninke migration, Central and Western Africa, African cities, France, the United States, the education of children born outside the Soninke country has often been a question to which family have tried to bring an answer. Confronted with a strong migration without a break with the country of origin, diverse strategies have been developed. Marriage with Soninke women, who remain in the village with their children, or follow their husband. In the case of mixed union, the theft of children, notably in Central Africa or Europe in the beginning of immigration. Children who are sent to the paternal country of origin for education. Far from being a calling into question of immigration, a forced settling, this return to the country of origin have a function of socialization and end almost always with a new departure after some years. for the Soninke diaspora in France, and more generally in Europe and in the US, we observe a progressive emergence of new sources of educational provision, in particular for the religious education of children. Thanks to the transnationalization of their migratory space, to the globalization of their Islam, and to the circulation of new religious elite between the country of origin, the Arabo-Islamic world, and the North. Now I'm going to speak about the naturalization and transnationalization of Soninke Islam in France. Of the different Soninke diaspora in Africa, Congo, Côte d'Ivoire, Gabon, South Africa, in Europe and in the US, the one in France is the most important and constitutes the pole of convergence of various circulation in transnational space. This position has systematically been exploited by the Francisco, those from France, to attempt to lead in an hegemonic fashion the transformation of the village. The first initiative of this diaspora with regard to their native country have been the building of the restoration of village mosques in the 60s and the 70s. Through this collective gesture, this diaspora, in particular the exiled aristocracy, being in lower position than the elder of the village, were competition with and fighting over the leadership of the multi-local village community. Something which has been less studied, however, and which is considered an ongoing phenomenon, is the formation and circulation of the Soninke religious elite, educated in Arabo-Muslim culture in their country of origin, Senegal, Mali, Mauritania, and then in the Arab countries, Egypt, Morocco, Libya, Saudi. This elite has played a major role in re-Islamization in the context of settlement, of the establishment of a family, and the production of a second generation. The singularity of this elite is to have launched from the beginning of the 70s a movement of re-Islamization in the heart of the immigrant Soninke population, and thus to have, through possible and necessary, the Islamization of the French land, which the majority of Soninke immigrants has previously considered a land without baraka, a pagan land where Islam could not flourish. Having arrived in France as migrant workers, like their countrymen, in the most attractive space of their area of dispersion, this elite very quickly discovered the strong religious demands that expressed themselves in the heart of immigration, in full transformation and full re-Islamization. Often precarious in status from an administrative or economic point of view, there are illegal migrants, notably in the beginning of their stay in France. These clerics have primarily developed their service to the Soninke immigration for linguistic reasons. Courses, sermons and chats held in communities or for African families on terms such as Islamic prayers, the young man, the Muslim woman. Also, they participate in globalization in that their migratory paths and their circulation take them across several spaces. Their Muslim practice are strongly limited to the Soninke group. The migrant workers clerics, far from being a comfortably established elite, have their religious activity go hand in hand with a remunerated activity in the sector traditional for these immigrants. For example, they work in the service industry, cleaning, catering. Taking advantage of local in the immigrant workers community or in the neighborhood association, they teach course and the Quran and teach Arabic to the migrant children. In France, certain parents choose to send their children to their country of origin. A strong conviction of many Soninke parents is that knowledge of Soninke universe will save their children. Thus, young people showing themselves to be pre-delinquent have often been sent back to the bled. Young women are often sent there to be married. In the two cases, their trips are envisioned as temporary, and the parents organize their return to France after some years, which should allow the children to grow up as real or good Soninke people. This phenomenon of return to the country for the social correction or for the inculcation of culture has been more or less described, and we will not return to it. We would like to call attention to the sending of young adolescents, not for the purpose of correction or for being steered back to the right path, but with the aim of educating them and instructing them in religious matters. Certainly, the difference between those two objectives is very small. I try to give you some examples of children that I interview in their itinerary, but I think I have not time to talk on this matter. So I'm going to give you just one example. Numa is a youngest daughter of Soninke Marabout family of 3 sons and 3 daughters, upset by the religious position of the 2 elder daughters, who have left Islam for another faith and who are both married to Frenchmen. The parents sent her and her 3 brothers to Bamako. The sons are registered in a French middle school and high school, and she is in the Arabo-Islamic school up to 9 years of age. They are put up in the house of close relatives. At the end of 3 years, they come back to France. The youngest girl is sent to Pakistan to finish her education in a Quranic school. After Pakistan, she pursued her education in Malaysia because her parents find that Pakistan is problematic from the point of view of language. Today, she is married to a Soninke immigrant in the youth and spends her time between his country and France. In conclusion, as I have already pointed out of the factor of social distinction for the Soninke in Islam, everyday tales recounted in public attest to this sentiment. No one can say that they have converted a Soninke to Islam, or speaking of young people who have been re-educated in Soninke country, they say, now this is a true Soninke, he speaks the language well and he proud. In a minority context, just as they are minorities in France, having the option of family education or of education in family and religious network in their country of origin, they can pursue immigration over longer period without fear of losing their identity. Systematically, despite the stays in their country of origin, the destinies of these children remain tied to immigration in the most valuable space, such as the country to the north. Thanks to their participation in transnational Muslim networks, such as the Tabligh or other, Soninke scholars count on religious brotherhood to make possible the education and circulation of children in very wide areas which correspond to the space of their diaspora. The community market alone offers real opportunities. This is a concordance between competent personnel accustomed to the countries of the north to which people emigrate, and the prestige Islam holds in the eyes of family, position which reinforces their minority status in the society that receives them. Some children integration to religious track anchor both children and parents in their own communities and begin as well to fulfill the need for endogenous religious personnel. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. As soon as we get the technical stuff worked out.
It's part of the happening.
Okay, Valérie, please.
Good evening to everyone, and looking at your faces, I noticed that you all seem very, very tired. So I'm going to try to make this extremely heavy topic something nice to listen to at the last talk. I would like also to thank Usman Khan for having invited me to this event and for having tried to come to a very stimulating way to compare two contexts that are actually, I think, converging as far as Muslim population treatment is concerned. So what I will do is give you some kind of introductory comments of a rather contextual kind, starting with Europe rather than France. In order to do what French usually do not do, but start by saying that French is, in that matter, is not exceptional anywhere. So in Europe, what's happening in France is quite symmetrical to what's happening elsewhere. And by saying that, I will drop you some images and photos to illustrate what I'm saying. So after this introduction, I will have three parts, let's say 2 parts and concluding remarks so as to fit in the time framework. What I will do is first draw a kind of rough map of the current discussions that are surrounding the diversity, quote, diversity, and national identity discussion. And here I slightly disagree with what has been said in the first paper, that I don't think that France is looking at the states as far as race and racial relations are concerned, but diversity has been directly imported as a topic and as a level from the American landscape in the political discourse. The second part I shall come back on the place of religion in this reflection, thinking about French diversity. And third, in my concluding remark, I will come to this idea of the racialization of Muslims in France, as my argument here being that this racialization that I see happening as a process of Muslims in France is both the outcome of, on the one hand, a quite long-standing historical perspective on republicanism, not on integration policies, on republicanism. And second, is also an outcome of a specific radicalization of the conversations that is actually being held between Muslims and non-Muslims in France. And as a sociologist, I look at the way conversation and interaction succeed, fail or not in specific surroundings. So that's my interest. The general content. When talking about, do you see that? How will I switch to PowerPoint? Yeah, I still see that. I start with these two pictures because I think they're quite illustrative of what I call, again, following a very classical sociological thinker, which is Mills, who wrote in 26, so it's not the last one who published something interesting on Muslims in Europe, but I think he tells us quite interesting stuff in terms of on the way the conversation should be held in contemporary society as far as difference and diversity is concerned. No, it's the first image. Yeah. And he used the word ordinary trap. And I think in the European Union context, in almost all member states, we are actually facing on a daily basis, and the New York Times of yesterday made a very, very interesting article on the Belgian situation, which is the last development on this story, pointing out that we're going towards a full ban of the full headscarf also in Belgium, that the Parliament still has to give a position on that. So I think we are facing in Europe this ordinary trap that is made of an incapacity to relate to differences and to connect between what is a big issue, integralism, radicalization, political Islam, and small anecdotes, anxieties, troubles, the daily routine we're embedded in and we're facing, and we're incapable, or we are making links that shouldn't be made, or we are incapable to give meanings to what's happening to us. And I think these two pictures are quite interesting because they are reflecting the way we talk in Europe about our Muslim co-citizens. So here you see the Swiss flag that is prodding black missile-shaped minarets alongside a woman that is wearing a niqab, with head-to-toe veil. And on the other picture you see a woman, she's actually in Australia, this one, but this is the burkini, what we call the burkini in Europe last summer, which is this two-piece bath swimming suit. That was the argument of a huge controversy both in Italy, in particular in North Italy, where there are not so many beaches, but there are some burkinis, in public swimming pools, and also in France in the southern part of the country. So why do I start with these two pictures? Just to give you an idea of how this panic about, on the one hand, multiculturalism having gone wild, and on the other hand, integration, Republican integration having failed, has been spreading in the European countries over the last 2 decades. And I think what is interesting here is that situations that are occurring in one context are very quickly made a reality in another context that have, as Ahmed rightly pointed out this morning, have completely different traditions, completely different public cultures as far as religion and state relationship, for instance, are concerned. So one of the most interesting questions, I think, for me is, or would be, how come are these divergent traditions, how come are these diverging models of citizenship really producing this Europeanized discourse of racialization of Muslims? And now I shall come to my first point, going back to France, but keep that.
It was wonderful to listen to you about these two pictures, just témoignage about these two pictures. First of all, just after the Swiss votation on minarets, 1 month after, an association, Turkish association in Alsace, in Strasbourg, Cogep, launched a contest of most beautiful minaret of France. So people are taking pictures everywhere in France and sending, and there is a jury who will choose, the most beautiful. I think that this kind of initiative, they increase the visibility and not the contrary. The second thing about this burkini, I don't know what beach was in Australia, but I remember last year in Adelaide, there were a huge debate in the Rescue Corporation of Adelaide Beach about the burkini. So it's not so rose in Australia either. They are talking about the presence of Muslims. It's a very strong corporation. And just a very small question. Could you just say a few words about the Mayotte statute, where the Sharia for the personal and family life in France, so the French territory, is applied. So as you said, for the continental France, there are all these principles, and we can discuss on these principles, the non-recognition of Catholicism, etc. But for other territories, for colonized territories, very pragmatic system is applied. Thank you.
Should we gather collect questions?
Well, why don't we directed.
The reason that I'm very, very talkative, so yeah, you had some comments, so I knew about the context and everything, but what is striking in the, not so far in the Mayotte status, is that, as was pointed out this morning by Solène, is that there is of course a pragmatic perception of how rules, principles, norms are applied and declined and concealed. And there are the normative expectations that are meta-discourses. That is precisely the problem between big issues and small troubles, that when you're embedded in small troubles as a local protagonist, you are entitled to adapt the local situation to what you as an individual want to see in your surroundings. So I don't have any specific things to say about Mayotte in this framework. I mean, the issue here is really to look at the way, while ethnicity and race in the French context are, let's say, forbidden labels, they are being given reality by the way Muslims as specific, not targets, but specific publics, are incorporating these labels in their own way to leave the ghetto, experiments discrimination, and not rely sufficiently, trustfully in the public institutions, for instance, to denounce it. So all that constellation.
Other questions? Yeah.
Thank you for the presentations all day. This one particularly, I've gotten a lot out of. It's better than a college education. Let's see. I have a question or two or three regarding the let's see, racialization of Muslims in the United States. And I wonder if you looked at racialization of the Muslims in sub-Saharan Africa, particularly in the Sudan and Darfur, and what's going on there, because it's believed by many, particularly African Americans, that it's a racial thing, a color thing, and with the Arabs who are lighter taking over from the darker skinned Africans. And that is a major problem in discussing this in our communities. And the other thing is, Amadou Diallo was a Muslim, and about 10 years ago he was killed in the Bronx. And he was shot 16 times, they shot him 41 times. And I was shocked that his family didn't seem to get support from the larger Muslim community. And his family went to Al Sharpton, and usually the immigrants don't want to have anything to do with African Americans until they get shot or something happens. And then they go, and I went up to the apartment because it was in the news, it was a big thing. And 4 policemen, I think everybody in here is probably too young to remember that, but it was a big news item at that time. I went up to the apartment where it happened, and I had to see the bullet holes myself. And they shot at him 41 times, they shot him 16 times. And they said that he was reaching for his wallet. And he wasn't there, and the only people who were there were the cops who shot him, and they all walked. And I used to dabble in journalism, so I knew the questions to ask the neighbors. Nobody else asked the neighbors if they heard anything. A neighbor told me that all they heard were the shots, and they were described the same way they were described in the newspapers, what the neighbors, but nobody interviewed them. Now, to me, Amadou Diallo, who was from, I believe, Guinea-Bissau, was shot because he was black, not because he was a Muslim, which brings me to something else. I'd be curious to know whether sub-Saharan Africans have been harassed more since Christmas last year with the underwear bomb, or whatever they call them, whether they've been harassed more because of that than they were with 9/11. I would think the olive-complexioned Arabs would have been harassed more after 9/11. a dark-skinned African, not in Muslim wear, is an African American, and he's going to have problems on that basis. And I'm curious to know whether in this country now they're having more problems based on being black or being Muslim. And the other question I wanted to direct was that I didn't get the full sentence, but I did get the part where you said African Americans did not experience upward mobility, I guess, until the civil rights movement. Is that what you were saying?
No, I was just talking about a theory that was used to explain the absence of socioeconomic mobility.
Overall, since slavery until now, when
The theory of culture of poverty was developed in like 1963 to explain why African Americans had not achieved, middle class status. So a special theory was developed for them. That was my point.
Oh, because I was going to say we did experience upward mobility. Otherwise, we'd all still be picking cotton.
Yeah, no, it was just about that we have theories to explain human behavior, but for African Americans, they came up with a special theory. That was my point.
Okay, thank you.
All right, at this point, why don't we, if there are other questions, why don't we collect a few questions and then give the panelists the last word if there are questions. Yeah, please.
Just a brief comment. Dr. Kinker, I appreciate your theorization about the racialization of Muslims, having done a lot of research on anti-Muslim discrimination, but I think we have to be careful when we talk about actions by the government and versus public discourse, generalizations, and stereotypes. One example, you mentioned the curbing of immigration. I did research on post 9/11 naturalization of people from Muslim majority countries or areas of the world that are heavily populated by Muslims, and I found that actually the number of people naturalized in the 7 years after 9/11 was larger than the number of people naturalized in the 7 years before 9/11. So when it comes to government actions, I don't think you need a pattern of incidents for the government to take certain precautions. But when you want to make generalizations, as you pointed out, and I'm not taking away from your thesis, but stereotypes can be very damaging when you just generalize without data. But for the government, doesn't need to.
Louise, some of this is you want to.
Oh, well, there are a number of cases of delays in naturalization, delays in issuing visas. There are many court cases about this, and I would suspect that nonetheless naturalizations would increase simply because of demographic increases. So, and I don't have any data on sub-Saharan Africans since the Christmas, I don't know if anybody else does, but I would suspect the net is going to be cast broader, and then with the Moscow event being women, I expect the net is going to get even broader with that.
Other questions or other comments from the panel on this last round?
Let me just address the earlier question on immigrants, immigrant Muslims versus African American Muslims, and the distancing, the social distance that has existed historically. The distance has existed historically for a number of reasons: structural reasons, economic reasons, animus may have been brought from the home countries. But what we've witnessed in the past 10 years is that since 9/11, there's a growing interest in race and identity in the African American experience from the children of these immigrants. This has a lot to do with the racial harassment that they experienced, the Pakistanis, the Arabs, the Turks, and so on, that they experienced post 9/11. There's an interesting campaign taking place now, being led by students from UC Santa Barbara, mostly Arab students, pushing for minority status in the census, pushing for sort of a new category for, and probably Louise can talk about this more, but historically the Arab Americans have long been categorized as white. But now you're getting these new communities, the younger generation, that's pushing for a different label, a different category. This has to do with changing demographics. New immigrants, earlier immigrants came from the Levant, Syria,